This is the third annual CSAD Global Read-A-Thon, honoring narratives from Africa and the African Diaspora. This year's theme, Roots, the Journey of Us.
Well, now back by popular demand, Germany. Students, faculty from the Obama Institute for Transnational American Studies at Johannes Gutenberg University in Mainz. They are joining us once again this year. They have been with us since the very beginning. So we are very grateful to them for their continued support. Today we're honored to have faculty member and dear friend of the Read-A-Thon, Dr. Mita Banerjee, joining us live from Germany. It's already, I guess after
Yeah, it's 10 o'clock at night.
10 o'clock. Okay, it's 10 o'clock. Well, thank you. Thank you. Have some tea. Stay up with us a little bit and tell us. Well, first of all, thank you for being here, right? And we're doing this together, third go round. Tell us, first of all, the Transnational American Studies. What does it entail for those who don't know what this Obama Institute does?
So we founded the Obama Institute in 2017, and the idea was really to say the image of the U.S. that actually the Obama family stands for is a U.S. that is bound up in a global space that has many transnational connections. So with both Barack Obama, but also Michelle Obama and his Barack Obama's sister, Alma Obama, who's a Germanist, right? And who came to our institute actually to speak to us. So the idea was very much to say, the U.S. as we know it is bound up with the rest of the world. U.S. culture has so much of an impact on the rest of the world. So our work has really been transnational. So my colleague, Professor Alfred Horner, had this vision that we should found an institute in Germany to talk about how the U.S. is bound up in a global context. And it's been really inspiring to our students because most of the work that they're doing is comparative, right? So they're comparing, for instance, Black German communities to African American communities. So this has been, a very vibrant space for us.
It's so unique. I think a lot of people really have questions about the connection there. It's the connective tissue, right, with the African diaspora. And you reveal, and other scholars talk about it, the fact that there's not even a word in German for race because of the history, the volatile racial history in that country.
The idea, what Germans have learned, from the Second World War, that after the Third Reich, we should never again use the word race, right? Because race was tainted by what the Nazis did. So then, the sort of outcome of that has been that now we don't use it anymore. Everybody, it makes you cringe when you use it in German. So now, but then people of color have said, if you can't use the word race, how can you resist racism? If you can't even say racism, if you can't say race. So then our sort of workaround has really been both actually in everyday life, but also in academic writing, that we're using the American term, right? The English term, we're saying race, even in a German language text. And that has been, both empowering because we're saying that gives us a language to talk about racial issues, discrimination, but also racial pride. But it's still sort of a detour. So this is something that we're working on, actually in conversation with the U.S.
It's so fascinating that you're able to do that. The so-called workaround, as you say, acknowledgement, information, freedom, it's all tied together. Thank you so much. We really appreciate you. And I want to take our audience to the production now from Germany.
Stories also help us create bridges between people and to create a common ground where people, regardless of their nationality, culture, ethnicity, sexual orientation, or skin color, can come together and have a fruitful and constructive exchange of ideas. So that's where I think lies the potential of stories of migration.
For me, migration and roots go hand in hand. When I think of migration, I also always think of returning. And that you don't always move in one direction. It really is more of a circle that always ties you back to where you started, the people and places and cultures that shape you. I think in sharing our stories, we allow ourselves to become more than just statistics. We become people who are whole and complex and deserving. We all have stories that deserve to be told, and in telling them, we begin to understand the world and each other in ways that only make us stronger, more connected, more human.
Sharing stories, it's as old as humanity itself. It's what sets us apart. When we tell our stories, we share more than just events. We let others see us as we truly are. The stories of migration especially hold incredible power. They reveal the person behind the label, the person society sometimes see as other, as a danger or even a threat. But when we hear their stories, real, personal, human stories, we shatter those myths.
My name is Meta Banerjee. I'm a professor of American Studies at the Obama Institute here in Mainz. And the book I would like to read from today is Roots by Alex Haley. And actually, one of my first childhood memories is I'm still a young child, and my mother is sitting in the living room, and she's watching the first time that the television series Roots has been released on German television. And she calls me into the living room, and I remember this moment. And she says, Mita, this is the story of the African American people. And there's such pride in her voice, and I couldn't place it. I didn't know why that was so important. And now looking back, I realized that, so when my mother married my father, nobody had ever heard of, a white German woman marrying an Indian man. So mixed race marriages were very uncommon. When my father married my mother, half the neighborhood of my grandfather in India stopped speaking to him, and so did half of the family. And so for my parents, they had no script of how to raise me. And so talking about the US became a way to sort of invent this script. And that's why, Roots, has so much meaning for me. And so this is a passage that I want to read from the beginning of the book. By ancient custom, for the next 7 days, there was but a single task with which Omoro would seriously occupy himself, the selection of a name for his firstborn son. It would have to be a name rich with history and with promise, for the people of his tribe, the Mandinkas, believed that a child would develop 7 of the characteristics of whomever or whatever he was named for. Omoro then walked out before all of the assembled people of the village. Moving to his wife's side, he lifted up the infant and, as all watched, whispered 3 times into his son's ear the name he had chosen for him. It was the first time his name had ever been spoken as this child's name, for Omoro's people felt that each human being should be the first to know who he was. The tang-tang drum resounded again, and now Omoro whispered the name into the ear of Binta, and Binta smiled with pride and pleasure. Then Omoro whispered the name to the Arafang who stood before the villagers. The first child of Omora and Binta Kinte is named Kunta, cried Brahma Chezi, and everyone knew it was the middle name of the child's late grandfather, Kairaba Kunta Kinte, who had come from his native Mauritania into the Gambia, where he had saved the people of Jafura from a famine, married Grandma Yaisa, and then served Jafura honorably till his death as the village's holy man. One by one, the Arafang recited the names of the Mauritanian forefathers, of whom the baby's grandfather, old Kairaba Kinte, had often told. The names, which were great and many, went back more than 200 reigns. Then the Jaliba pounded on his tang-tang, and all the people exclaimed their admiration and respect at such a distinguished lineage. Out under the moon and the stars, alone with his son, that 8th night, Omoro completed the naming ritual. Carrying little Kunta in his strong arms, he walked to the edge of the village, lifted his baby up with his face to the heavens, and said softly, Fent kiling dorong le guarata ke itete. Behold, the only thing greater than yourself. I'm wondering whether my work at the university as an academic goes back to this first moment when my mother, talked to me about roots, which I didn't understand at the time. Because in Germany, even today, it's impossible to say the word race. Because of Germany's history, we cannot use the term race in German. So when I write about race in Germany, I use the English term, race. And so in a way, the only possibility we have to speak about race in Germany is through the US. So we borrow the vocabulary from the US to talk about Germany. So my work is in Asian German studies, and it's in Black German studies. So we need sort of the fields of African American studies, of Asian American studies to talk about Germany. And even if these concepts have not yet taken hold in Germany, it makes me happy just to know that they exist somewhere in the world.
Hello, my name is Sonia. I'm assistant professor at the Obama Institute for Transnational American Studies here at the University of Mainz. I'm lecturer and academic advisor as well in our Bachelor of Arts and Master of Arts and in the education programs. In my research, I'm currently working on a book project on intercultural identity negotiations in African American and Native American literary and cultural productions such as autobiographies, novels, essays, and plays. But I'm also interested in migration narratives in the context of transnational American studies with a focus on contemporary narratives, documentaries, life writings about migration to and from the Americas, to and from Europe. This year's topic, Roots, for the Read-A-Thon, I selected Pauline Marshall's novel Praise Song for the Widow, which is about the middle-aged, upper-middle-class, elderly woman, Eva Tara Johnson, short Avi. She's from New York City, and at the beginning of the novel, we find her on a vacation cruise, on a cruise liner with her two friends to the Caribbean. She's done this vacation tour several times already, but this time something's different. She has a dream, almost like a nightmare. Her great aunt appears in that dream and tries to talk to her, and she wakes up the next day, packs her bags, and leaves the cruise and her friends. She then finds herself on the very small island on the Grenadines. She eventually encounters and joins an annual excursion to the small neighboring island Carriacou. On Carriacou, she meets the old man Joseph, who's like an ancestor, but also like a trickster figure. And he eventually reintroduces her to the African, the Caribbean, African American, African Caribbean cultures of her great aunt Cuny, whose stories about flying Africans she already heard as a child when she visited her great aunt. So this story of the myth of the flying Africans is that a group of Igbos who were brought as slaves via the Middle Passage to the Caribbean, in some versions to what is now the U.S. mainland, via the Middle Passage. When they arrived there, they took a look around and then decided to fly back over the water to Africa. This was a story that her aunt used to tell her and take her to the Igbo landing in the place in South Carolina where her great aunt lived. So she's reminded of this story. She remembers the summers with her great aunt, and here on the small island of Carriacou with Joseph and his daughter, she is reintroduced to a community of African Americans, African Caribbeans who remember the dances, the practices, and do this ring shout as a cultural something as cultural commemoration. In the novel, we can say that A.V. Johnson's journey is eventually two or threefold. So she takes the journey to the Caribbean, first as a tourist via the cruise liner, which symbolizes her materialist lifestyle that she acquired together with her husband, Jerome Johnson, who deceased a few years prior to A.V. taking the journeys with her friends to the Caribbean. Their social upward mobility is represented, for example, by the family's move from a small, damp apartment in Harlem to a representative family home in New York, North White Plains district. And this comes at the cost of leaving behind blues, jazz music they used to play, the entertainment they used to enjoy with their friends, and the community that they used to experience when they were living with friends and family in Harlem. So many decades have passed eventually, right? The couple starts young in Harlem, working their way up. They have achieved a lot of financial stability, security. They have sent their daughters to college, but they are kind of stuck in that upper middle class, very materialistic lifestyle. And so here, this is like the physical journey that A.V. Johnson experiences, going to the Caribbean, starting as a tourist, but then becoming someone more like who's a friend, a visitor, a relative almost to Joseph and his family. We can also say that culturally and spiritually, the journey A.V. takes in the Caribbean moves away from the other tourists, recalls them the memories of the community of her great aunt, as well as the communal moments she experienced on an annual excursion in New York City already. So what's really interesting is that this time, this kind of excursion that's been done in the Caribbean with the group of Joseph who go back to practice traditional ways is not a first encounter for A.V. with traditional roots and her family's roots, but rather reminds her of something that she first experienced also with her aunt and Tatum in this kind of in-between space of between African cultural memory and New York City. But also in New York City, she experienced as a high school girl moments of feeling connected to her community. And these feelings have gotten lost for her and her husband over the decades of their social upward mobility, but now she's slowly reconnected to those stories and cultural rituals. So the story about it's often known as or called the myth of the flying Africans signifies the roots of her great aunt, whose credibility, the credibility of the story, right? The 10-year-old A.V. comes to question, taking this only literally. She says, well, how come they didn't drown, right? And I want to read the passage, or a kind of shortened version of the passage from the novel, which runs over 3 pages, but for the sake of the example, I leave out a few passages and sentences. So this is when A.V. is about 10 years old with her aunt. She's heard the story for many, many years, but this time now she comes to question it, and this is the version that the reader is presented with here in this moment in the text. It was here that they brought them. This is what the great aunt tells A.V. Taking them out of the boats right here where we are standing. And the minute those Igbos was brought on shore, they just stopped, my grand said, and taken a look around. And they seen things that you and me don't have the power to see. Because those Africans were people, my grand said, could see in more ways than one. The kind can tell you about things happened long before they were born and things to come long after they are dead. Well, they seen everything that was to happen around here that day. The slavery time and the war my gran always talked about, the emancipation and everything after that, right on up to the hard times today. Those Igbos didn't miss a thing. And when they got through studying them, when they knew just from looking at them how those white folks was going to do you know what those Igbos did? They just turned, my gran said, all of them, and walked on back down to the edge of the river here. They just kept walking right on out over the river. Just kept on walking like the water was solid ground. remembers the story as she grows up, begins to question the credibility. Again, this is the moment where she reads this literally, right? But she also takes a literal vacation to the Caribbean, right? But she's not psychologically, culturally in touch at this point with the meaning and of the story for her family and for her extended community. So the third interpretation of Avi's journey, right? We had the physical one, the geographical one. Now is the spiritual one, is when she recognizes the importance of this story of the flying Africans, the cultural meaning, the significance, and the roots that this narrative presented for her grandmother and her great-grandaunt, and which is now passed on eventually to Avi as well. We also have a psychological development of Avi, a psychological journey in a way, because when she returns from this excursion in the Caribbean, she finds a way to reinterpret the story and also her position in maintaining, keeping up the story, but also passing the story on to the younger generations. So eventually Avi is able to experience and understand the physical experience and the dimension of this flying, of this Middle Passage reference, when she kind of gets lost in the Caribbean on this island, finds herself without sunglasses, hat, a watch, right? And is kind of completely on her own for a moment. So she kind of relives this physical and bodily experience of understanding and of finding the roots. Now we have then the metaphorical dimension of the narrative that her aunt told her, the place that she took her in South Carolina, this Igbo landing, has this geographical and metaphorical dimension. Now the psychological one comes when the roots of her family and the heritage tradition is taken up by Avi, and she now then decides to sell the house in North White Plains in order to invest in Tatum, in the house of her great aunt, and to rebuild this as a family vacation home, but also as a kind of a vacation camp for high school students, young students from the city to come spend the summers with her then, as she was able to do with her great aunt. So Tatum, the place of her great aunt in South Carolina, take on a new significance for Avi, who at the end of the novel decides to return to the place for longer stretches of time, and then to become herself an ancestor figure for the younger generation and the grandchildren of her older daughters. And so I have a second text passage from the final passages of the novel, where Avi speaks about and thinks about and formulates this idea of what to do with the house in Tatum and her new role for her family and by extension for her community and the city as well. So she says, and again I'm leaving out a few passages in between because the passage will be too long, but to condense it to like the gist of this quote. So she would take it upon herself to speak of the excursion to others elsewhere. Tatum, Avi Johnson found herself thinking of the house her great aunt had left her. She had made up her mind to fix it up, sell the house in North White Plains, and use the money to build in Tatum. It would be a vacation house, and each summer she would ask that her two grandsons be sent to spend time with her in Tatum. And Marion, that's her daughter, could bring some of the children from her school. The place could serve as a summer camp, and at least twice a week in the late afternoon, she would lead them, grandchildren and visitors alike, in a troop over to the landing. To conclude, in my reading of Praise Song for the Widow in the connection to the topic of roots, I would suggest that the novel represents the theme of roots within African American studies and is one of many works that interpret the story of the flying Africans for the protagonist. Of course, making that the second of Toni Morrison's Song of Solomon or Julie Dash's film Daughters of the Dust come to mind, as well as more contemporary interpretations, for example, Beyoncé's album Lemonade, or Tanahashi Coates' novel The Water Dancer, who all integrate to various degrees and sometimes in various versions this story of the flying Africans. So these readings, and particularly this of Polly Marshall's praise song for the widow, then present this theme of flying not as a story of flight, but as a story of ancestors taking roots geographically, spiritually, and culturally, and thus as stories of remembering those roots in as well and as through literature and art.
Hello, everybody. I'm Alfred Hornung. I'm a research professor of Transnational American Studies and the speaker of the Obama Institute for Transnational American Studies. I'm also the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Transnational American Studies, which we host now at the Obama Institute in collaboration with Stanford University. Some of my recent activities I would like to mention, of course, particularly my interest in transnational American studies, given the occupations I have. And I recently did a project on the transnational work of African American women in Germany, Angela Davis, Audre Lorde, and Mary Church Terrell, the way in which they interacted here in Germany from the beginning of the 20th century to our own time. It's interesting that African American women apparently take a completely different approach to international and transnational affairs than African American men who simultaneously came to Germany. Jake sat like a big eager boy and learned many facts about Haiti before the train reached Pittsburgh. He learned that the universal spirit of the French Revolution had reached and lifted up the slaves far away in the remote island, that Black Haiti's independence was more dramatic and picturesque than the United States' independence, and that it was a strange, almost unimaginable exception of the beautiful ideas of the liberté, égalité, fraternity of mankind that shook the foundation of the Romantic era. For the first time, he heard the name Toussaint Louverture, the Black slave and leader of the Haitian slaves, heard how he fought and conquered the slave owners, but then protected them. He decreed laws for Haiti that held more of a human wisdom and nobility than the Code Napoleon, defended his baby revolution against the Spanish and the English vultures, defeated Napoleon's punitive expedition, and how tragically he was captured by a civilized trick, taken to France and sent to Napoleon to die broken-hearted in a cold dungeon. A black man? Oh, I wish I'd been a soldier under this man, Jake said simply. He plied his instructor with questions, heard of Dessalines, who carried on the fight begun by Toussaint Louverture and kept Haiti independent. But it was incredible to Jake that a little island of freed slaves had withstood the three leading European powers. The waiter told him that Europe was in a complex state of transition then, and that the wonderful age had been electrified with universal ideas, ideas so big that they had lifted up ignorant people, even black, to the statue of God. The world doesn't know, he continued, how great Toussaint Louverture really was. He was not merely great, he was lofty, he was good. The history of Haiti today might have been different if it had been allowed to finish his work. He was honored by a great enigmatic poet of that period, and I honor both Toussaint and the poet of keeping in my memory the wonderful, passionate lines. And he quoted Wordsworth's sonnet, Toussaint, the most unhappy man of men, whether the whistling rustic tend his plough within the hearing, or there had be now, pillowed in the same deep dungeon, earless dent. Jake felt like one passing through a dream, vivid in rich, varied colors. It was revelation, beautiful in his mind. That brief account of an island of savage black people who fought for collective liberty and was struggling to create a culture of their own, a romance of his race, just down there by Panama. How strange. Jake was very American in spirit and shared a little of that comfortable Yankee contempt for our poor foreigners. But as an American end, he looked askew at foreign ends. Africa was judged, and African bush ends cannibals, and West Indians were monkey chasers. But now he felt like a boy who stands with the map of the world in colors before him and feels the wonder of the world. The waiter told him that Africa was not jungle as he dreamed of it, nor slavery the peculiar role of black folk. The Jews were the slaves of the Egyptians. The Greeks made slaves of their conquered. The Gauls and Saxons were slaves of the Romans. He told Jake of the old destroyed cultures of West Africa and of their vestiges, of black kings who struggled stoutly for the independence of their kingdoms, Bremem of Ashanti, Tofa of Dahomey, Gesdidli of Benin, Gedawabo of Zululand, Menelik of Abyssinia. Had Jake ever heard of the little Republic of Liberia, founded by American ends, and Abyssinia, deep set in the shoulder of Africa, besieged by the hungry wolves of Europe, the only nation that has existed free and independent from the earliest records of history until today. Abyssinia, oldest unconquered nation, ancient strange as Egypt, persistent as Palestine, legendary as Greece, magical as Persia. This passage, because it really strikes a tone with what we experience still now, and a return of the past, if you want, in the contemporary United States and also in the world, if you want, because this conversation between these two men reflects somehow an important point. The conversation between Jake and Ray that I read from exemplifies the two poles of Mackay's concern to affirm the common life of Black people of African descent worldwide, if you want, and the acceptance of the different language and behavior of the working class people, and at the same time, his effort to educate the underprivileged and underrepresented or maybe misrepresented people. From the educated person, Jay, who not only knows French, but has also gone to university to study, as opposed to Jake, who, has no education in any kind of higher education. So these two are contrasted with each other. But what is interesting is that Jake is always eager to learn. He very attentively listens to this history of settler colonialism, of European imperialism, of the United States imperialism in the Caribbean, the way in which this has already interfered with life in the beginning at the turn of 1800. And what is also significant that he brings in, literature. This poem that he talks about is a sonnet by William Wordsworth, who in England wrote about the fate of Toussaint Louverture, and blamed Napoleon for capturing Toussaint Louverture, bringing him to a prison in France, where he then died. So this is a dedication. And at the same time, this also connects with Claude McKay's attempt to adapt to a form of writing that is, accepted by the so-called cultural elite, because he also, once he comes to New York, starts writing sonnets. But the difference is that he really always combines a revolutionary spirit with a form of entertainment. Claude McKay, who had come from Jamaica to the United States in 1912 and then studied briefly at Tuskegee University in Alabama, and then went to Kansas for a brief time, but from 1914 on, he lived in New York City, and he had come as an important poet, writing in the Jamaican vernacular, what today we call nation language of Jamaica. And when he came to the United States, he adapted his style to what we can call modern English literature, also using the standard English words and texts. He became very famous in 1919 when he wrote a poem called If We Must Die, which was a direct response to the so-called Red Summer in the cities, in New York City, Chicago, and other places, where Black people were discriminated by the white hegemony. And, they fought against it for the first time in a massive kind of uproar. And Claude McKay gave this a form of literature that is not just to be read, but he always practices also his ideas. So in that sense, I think this is probably the message that we can take for our contemporary period of time, that it is not enough to just voice your critique and speak about it, but we also have to act.